Okay, first of all, whenever I speak, I like to do just a little bit of an exercise, if you do not mind. If you'd all just take one deep breath, and then as you release it, lower your expectations. That feels good. Thank you. After listening to Helen Hunt, I was like, I feel like I should start with an apology, or maybe the line, now for something completely different. As a matter of fact, the reason I ask you to lower your expectations partly is for me, obviously. I go around giving speeches now as my job, but there is a part of me that is still a shaky, quaky 19-year-old, and I have to tell you why. I went to the University of Minnesota at Duluth, the coldest part of the state, and I took a speech class. And I was an 18-year-old. It was my first class, first quarter, and they said, go find something that you want to speak about, come back, do a 5-minute presentation. And I thought, okay, this will be great. And so I went back and I formed this what I thought was a perfect little speech. I have no idea what it was about. I don't remember it at all, except for this. I gave it, shaking, quaking, and the teacher from the back of the room said, never do that again. I know, right? So here I am, a speech major at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I have been told never to speak in public again. Now, to her credit, she did show. I spent about a week alone crying in my dorm room, but to her credit, she showed up about a week later and said she was sorry, she was having a bad day, and she didn't mean it, and please come back. But it's like the damage was already done, you know? So the reason I tell you that story is because I'm speaking. I really wouldn't mind if you would spend a little bit of time in your own mind thinking about stories that have been told to you that tell you less than, that you're not capable of, that you can't, that you shouldn't. Because I believe that we've all been told those stories and they impact us to this day. It impacts me to this day because every time I get up and speak, I feel like, I don't know if I have it in me today. I don't know if somebody in the back is going to say, never do that again. But it's something that I hopefully have been able to move past. And by the way, in that speech class, I was there long enough to learn that every good speech has a very clear beginning, a very clear middle, and a very clear end. This will not be that speech. In fact, let me start at the end. The end of my speech is, remember who you are. Be who you are. Share who you are, and change the world. Okay, here's my story. I don't conversations. And if you don't happen to follow everything that I'm saying, has anybody here had their Myers-Briggs test done? Yeah? Anybody here an ENFP? Yeah? I love it! Okay, this will explain a lot. I took my Myers-Briggs test back when I was working as a news anchor at the NBC affiliate in the Twin Cities. They were trying to get everybody to be able to work together at that time, and it wasn't going that well. So they tested me, and it was mind-blowing to me. Until that point in my life, I had thought I was the absence of good qualities. And they tested me, and they told me I was an ENFP, which, by the way, they also told me is the least valuable personality type in corporate America, because we're the ones who dream big dreams and inspire and then leave the room. But so they told me I was an ENFP, and they gave me a personality type prayer to go along with it, which may explain why if you miss a few things, it may not be your fault. And the prayer goes like this. Dear God, please help me to focus. Look, a bird! So I will do my best. But the bottom line is, I come to you, and if you heard the introduction sounds really pretty. It's like I was a news anchor in the Twin Cities, and people think that's cool. And then I was on HGTV, and I hosted a show for 10 years. It was one of the top-rated shows, and that's cool. But I am somebody who I was left with a hole that I couldn't explain. I had this successful life, and I could not figure out why I felt absent from it. I had grown up in a small town in Cambridge, Minnesota. I had a mother and a dad who were there for me. I had a sister who was brilliant. But the fact of the matter is I grew up feeling like an outsider. I grew up feeling like, as I said, like there was something missing, like the absence of good qualities. And I can look back and I can see that my mom and my dad were, like angles. They were into farming, and they were into construction. And my mother, like, dear God, she was so busy. You couldn't leave a T-shirt on the floor. It turned into a rug before you knew it. The whole family was just about hard work ethic. And my sister was also that way. She was very scientific and math and all that. And I grew up as the person who wanted to tap dance in that family. I wanted to lie on my bed and read a book and lose myself in the dreams of that book. And so there was nothing wrong with who I was, but because I grew up in a home that honored something else, I assumed that there was something wrong with me. And that's how I came to, my first career was in acting. Actually, I came out here in the early 1980s to study at Warner Brothers. I thought that if I could get enough applause, that would fill the hole, and I could figure out who I was and what was missing. And I did that, and basically I came out here, and the Warner Brothers people said, you are not tall, you are not blonde, and you don't have large breasts. I think you should probably go home now. And so I did. And so I went back to Minnesota, and I thought, broadcast news. I could go into broadcast news. I didn't have any experience in broadcast news. I didn't even have a degree at that time. I still don't have a degree. So I went back and I thought, okay, I can take a couple of classes on that, and then I can go and I can audition, and I could pretend to be a news anchor. I could pretend to be a journalist because I was a pretty good actress. So I went and I got a job. I got a job as a news anchor. And I thought, okay, this is it. This has got to be my ticket to knowing that I'm good enough, that I'm strong enough, that I have something to offer the world. And I lasted at that station for 2.5 years, and then I went to a different station, and I won a national Emmy, and I was able to travel all over and meet wonderful people. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I had this life that looked beautiful, but it wasn't filling the need that I had to feel like my life had meaning. And so I started to dream about a different job that I would have, and I dreamed that I could leave that job behind that kind of inspired fear. I always thought that when you're a news anchor, you tuck people in at night with a blanket of fear, and then, good night. The world is a terrible place. Sleep well. If you were lucky, you had Skippy the water skiing squirrel right before you went to bed, but most nights you didn't. So I thought, I dreamed of maybe a job where I could have joy, I could have laughter, I could be creative, I could hug people. And one night I went to a book club meeting that I had never been to before, and I have never been to since, and a woman said, would you like to host a show for the Home and Garden Network? And I thought, okay, this might be it. This might be it. At least I can get out of doing the serious work that I'd been doing that was very fear-inspired. And eventually I said yes. They told me it was only going to last for 13 weeks. This show called Decorating Sense, which is all about redoing rooms for under $500. They told me that it would only last for 13 weeks, and I was at it for 10 years. And it was in so many ways joyful, and it was creative, and I hugged more people than I could even count for you, and I laughed a lot. But there was still something missing. I could not figure it out. I felt so ungrateful. Like Helen was talking about gratitude, and I'm such a strong believer in gratitude, and I've been so grateful for my life, for every experience. But I couldn't find a way to feel whole in myself through this. And so I started dreaming again of doing something else. And during this time frame, my husband and my daughter and I went to Puerto Rico for a vacation. And again, on the way back, grateful, so grateful for the opportunity to be able to go and to do and to have fun and beautiful beaches and blue skies and dinners out. And I still went back with emptiness. So I sat on the plane, because they make you sit on planes, and took out a little yellow legal pad, and I thought, if I write my life story, maybe there's some way that I can make sense of this. Maybe I can figure out where I took a left turn when I should have taken a right turn. Maybe there's an answer for this, or maybe I'm just crazy. And so I took it out, expecting to write, Joan Steffend was born in Minneapolis, raised in Cambridge, of Robert and Ruth Steffend, and all those, and then maybe tell a couple of childhood stories and go, that was the answer, that was the problem. If only they hadn't said that to her. But it didn't come out that way. I took out my little pen, and I took out the legal pad, and the words literally fell off my pen. It was not as though I was writing the story. It was as though the story was being written for me. And it came out like a metaphor. And it came out easily. I have been a writer my whole life, and so I know what it's like to have writer's block, and it's painful. And I know what it's like to have things easy. This was beyond easy. This was I wonder what word is coming next. And that happened for about 45 minutes. It just flowed off the pen in this metaphor, and I could see what was happening. I could see what the direction was that it was heading. But it stopped about 2/3 of the way through. It just stopped. There was nothing more that I could shake out of that pen. There was nothing more that I could figure out in my mind to write down. So I came home and I thought, well, that was interesting. I can kind of see where it's heading, but I stuck it into a little bedroom drawer. And I forgot about it for 5 years. And those were some of the toughest years of my life. Some of the toughest years. It was one of those times in my life where I was so challenged by life. I wasn't certain if I wanted to stay. I lost my parents. I lost my father. I watched my sister go through her end-stage cancer and pass away. I ended up in court with an ex-brother-in-law who it was just. And my mother got very, very ill during this time. Raising children, I have 2 beautiful daughters. Raising children and trying to keep my life in some semblance of order. It was so tough. But as I look back, I'm so grateful for those times. I can't even express it. It felt like the time when coal becomes a diamond. It's like the pressure is so great that you have no choice but to change. And after those 5 years, I thought about that little yellow legal pad, and I went upstairs to my room, and I picked it up, and I sat down in my kitchen, and the exact same thing happened. This metaphor just flowed off my pen, and it was about a half an hour later, it was done. And I had no idea who this was for other than myself. It was a story of being born brilliant and beautiful and unique and magnificent. And then the world coming up and saying, oh, maybe you should be a little less of that. And we don't think that that's so special. Maybe you could be a little bit more to the middle. Is there a way that you could possibly become a little smaller, because it makes us uncomfortable because you're so magnificent? And you start to tell yourself those stories. You start to put on those clothes that other people give you. You start to believe the stories yourself, and that's the saddest part to me. Is sometimes you start to tell, almost always, you start to tell those stories to yourself. In fact, anybody here heard of Dr. Bruce Lipton? He's just a brilliant man. Medical school doctor who has written something called The Biology of Belief, and he says that we have I think it's 55,000 thoughts a day. About 75% of them are redundant negative thoughts about ourselves. And most of those redundant negative thoughts and belief systems come from our childhood. And not to blame your parents. It's the way we're set up, that from 0 through 7, we're basically in a theta wave state, which is almost like a hypnotic state, where everything that is said to you is taken in, and it is put down into a tape recorder that becomes your belief system. It becomes how you operate in the world. And that's where I was in this situation. I was operating on somebody else's belief system when I knew that somehow I was magnificent. And it's so crazy to be able to say that. I would never have said I was magnificent, up until just a few years ago. Thank you. And you're all magnificent. So the bottom line is I ended up thinking this story was for me, and it taught me that I had left myself behind. I had left who I was behind. And I thought it was just for me until I read it at a Valentine's Day dinner, or it was just a group of people who were getting together for music and poetry, and I thought, I'll just read it out loud. And I read it out loud for the first time, and I saw the recognition in most of the women's faces. I don't know that the men maybe recognized it as well, but my favorite quote, somebody came up after that night and said, I had tears in my bra. And so I thought that was a good sign. So I went home and I told my husband that. I said, I don't know, there might be something, maybe somebody else could make use of this. And so he called the publishing company in the Twin Cities and said, would you take a look at something that my wife has written? And so I, following every rule of the publishing industry, just attached it to an email and sent it to them. And these delightful, lovely people said that they thought it was a book. And so that's the book that came out. It's called And She Sparkled. And while you eat, I am going to read this book to you. And no worries, it is my autobiography, but it's not 1,000 pages like Bill Clinton. It's only about 40, and a lot of them are really filled with illustrations. And it looks like a children's book, but I call it a children's book for grown-ups, because I wrote it for myself when I was 50. There once was a little girl, and she sparkled. She lived in her magnificence, singing and dancing wherever life took her. In the morning, a finger of sunlight would reach gently through the blinds to tickle her awake, and she would leap from her bed, looking for joy wherever she could find it. And she found it. With her toes in the grass, her tiny hands around the dandelion, her hair tangled from the possibilities for fun that swirled around her, she was enough. At night, she would snuggle under her covers, barely able to wait for the dreams that would take her to even greater places and set the stage for the next day. One morning, though, the sunlight felt sharp, stabbing at sleepy eyes, and a little grumble escaped her mouth as she stumbled out of bed. She did dance that day, but not as joyfully, not as she had the day before. And that night, she punched at her pillow, waiting for sleep to take her away from the day, away. Slowly, people noted with pride that the little girl was growing up. Learning to act mature is what they called it. They were doing their jobs well. And so the little girl became a big girl, nicely folding her hands in her lap as she sat very still, wondering why she felt so alone. There was still a part of her that felt like dancing and singing, but that wasn't acceptable most of the time. It might disturb someone. It might not be appropriate. It most certainly wasn't useful. So as the girl grew, she would lock the door of her room when the others left and sing and dance and visit the little girl inside, being careful to be a little quiet so she could hear if anyone returned. The girl grew and became ever more dutiful. No one saw her dance. No one heard her sing. She memorized the answers others gave her for who she was, and soon it seemed even she forgot her little girl. To be sure, there were days when it looked as though the girl was happy, but the smiles were usually on the outside and not the inside. Life went on for the girl, now a woman, and her life looked a lot like everyone else's. She was told that was success. Life, they said, is all about fitting in. Don't ask questions, makes us all a little uncomfortable, and you don't want that. So the woman spent her days waking up and waiting to fall asleep. She wasn't aware the little girl was patiently waiting for her, reaching out in small ways every day, every night, But one morning, she felt a familiar tickle, and the sunlight played on her face for a moment, and it made her smile. An energy she hadn't felt in some time lifted her out of bed. She sensed something familiar, and yet somehow it was new. That day was more ordinary than not, but from time to time she was filled with hope, which rose in waves and then disappeared into the ordinary. She went to bed that night happier than usual, but slightly confused at what the day had been about. The next day dawned, and the woman again sensed something familiar and exciting in the sunlight. In fact, she felt so alive in that moment. She danced out of bed and down the hall silently so no one would hear her. Moments in the day found her quietly humming to herself, dancing in her dreams while she lived the life she thought she should. She went to bed that night not as anxious to sleep as anxious to be awake again. And the months went on that way with joy, dancing, just below the surface of the woman. As the years went by, the woman became bolder, discovering things about herself she had somehow forgotten. She spent time every day hungrily uncovering pieces of a little girl from long ago. She decided she could no longer only be the person others expected to see. She was that, but she was so much more. She had always been so much more. She decided to share who she was with the world and with herself. There was magic to be remembered. And there was that urgent and now familiar rhythm that kept her dancing and looking for new songs to sing. Some people didn't really like that. They had come to depend on her the way she used to be. Now she made some of them uncomfortable, even angry. Are people really supposed to listen to their own rhythm and dance, they asked? Or should they march in the quiet lines laid out for them? Didn't matter to her. She didn't want to tell anyone else what to do. The only thing that mattered to the woman was the voice of the little girl living in her heart, whispering softly that she was indeed enough. She was magnificent, and she sparkled. And that is my life story. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love that story. I love that story because it allowed me to look into my life in ways that I had not looked into my life before. It allowed me to own who I was, be who I am, walk through the world with a sense of power, and not power in a bad way, but in a sense of I know who I am and my boundaries are clear. I'm not going to be angry, but I am going to be clear about my boundaries. And it gave me such a sense of freedom because I had always been the people pleaser in my family. It's like I would walk up and I would meet somebody and it's like, who do you want me to be? Okay, I'll be that person. I'll be entertaining or I'll be very serious or I'll be whatever you want. And it ended up causing me no end of pain. Before I would go in to make a public appearance at HGTV or Care 11, I would have to use every bit of power that I had in order to get myself to walk into the room because I wasn't certain that I could be everything to everybody who was in that room. I don't have that fear anymore. And I think, I know for me it's from owning very clearly the little girl who came in perfect and unique and brilliant. It's the same way as looking into nature and seeing this beautiful acorn and then somehow demanding that it become a birch tree. We come in with our own beautiful, unique seed of who we are. Don't ask yourself to be something other than that. A daisy doesn't look at a rose and go, dang, I wish I was a rose. I don't think. And I didn't tell you this before, but I am married to a wonderful man, 2 beautiful daughters who are now 29 and 23, and I'm so proud of them. But I also have a boyfriend, and his name is Albert Einstein. I have become such a lover of Albert Einstein, part of the reason is he agrees with me, and I have to share the one quote from him that I think is the absolute best quote of all time. Truly, I love this. Albert Einstein says, "Everyone is a genius." I really want you to take that in. Everyone is a genius. But if you judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree, it will spend its whole life believing it's stupid. I just think there's such brilliance in that. He also said imagination is more important than knowledge, so I got that covered. But and that's the story is told again and again and again about people who are brilliant and marvelous and are told to sit down and be quiet. In fact, I have a note in here. I've got to read it to you. It was a report card of a 15-year-old boy named Johnny Gurdon. The science teacher wrote on this 15-year-old's report card, "His work has been far from satisfactory. Several times he has been in trouble because he will not listen, but will insist on doing his work in his own way. I believe he has ideas about becoming a scientist. On his present showing, this is quite ridiculous. It would be a sheer waste of time, both on his part and of those who have to teach him." He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine last year. Professor Sir John Gurdon, because he insisted on doing things his own way. He decided not to follow. He decided to own who he was and bring that forward, and that's how we move forward as a human being and as a culture. And a lot of people will ask me, what was part of this process where I kind of owned who I was? And I have to go back to, I'm so grateful that Helen said that nature is what gives her hope, because nature is what really helped me to own my own magnificence and my own purpose. All you need to do is, you don't need to live in California, although it's beautiful weather. You can go to a produce section of a grocery store and marvel at the perfection and the beauty and the absolute diversity of nature. Everything is stunning if you look at it. The circulatory system of a rainbow chard is extraordinary. You can sit and just look at one of those flowers out there and see the beauty. And then at some point, I remember that I'm part of nature. I'm looking at that and seeing it and appreciating it. And at one point, I remembered that I was a part of nature. So there had to be beauty and purpose and beautiful diversity in me. I wasn't here to be like everybody else. I was here to be this puzzle piece. I would also say that silence is a glorious teacher. If you can find ways to put silence into your life. It's shocking sometimes when you have silence, because we don't get it in our life very often. Even if you're driving down the 405 and you decide to turn off the radio for a moment and just sit with your thoughts and listen to who you are and to listen to the stories that you're telling yourself. I don't know if you've come up with any stories that have been told to you, but I asked that of a group that I spoke with a few weeks ago, and a woman shared it with tears in her eyes. She had been told when she was 5 years old, they were doing a cutting exercise in kindergarten, and they were doing circles. Not a big deal, except for she loved crafts. She loved art. She was 5 years old, and she didn't cut a perfect circle, and the teacher came up and took the circle and crumpled it up and threw it away and said it wasn't any good. So what story, and she said it with tears in her eyes, and she was 45. What stories have been told to you? What stories are you continuing to tell yourself that you might live a happier, bolder life without that voice in your ear? Sometimes I wouldn't think, with the stuff that I say to myself sometimes, I wouldn't want me for a friend. We need to honor who we are. One of the other things that I was so grateful that this book gave to me was the ability to dream. And I had a lot of so-called dreams come true, having, worked with certain people and won certain awards and had certain jobs and been out in the public eye. But when I look back at my life, I've had one dream only, and that is to be at peace. And I would talk to people about world peace, and they would laugh at me. It's like, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. What are you crazy? Why would you even think that could be a possibility? The human race is an angry, we're angry, and we want what we want, and they want what we want, and we're constantly at war. I actually have decided that I That's my goal, is world peace. I know, I kind of want to laugh when I say it because I can understand that it's not a goal that I can go, yes, by 2016 we will have world peace. But the idea that I have come to is that inner peace is the way to global peace. And I have formed a peace project called Peace Begins With Me, a small, big peace project, because we all have to start small. We need to start with, are you living an authentic life? Can you love yourself? Are you aware of who you are? Are you kind to yourself? And then when you do that, you automatically share it with other people. And there is no way, if you look at that, there is no way that we can achieve world peace without people achieving inner peace. We can have a legislator come in here, we could legislate peace, but how long will that last? Well, we've seen how long that lasts. Could you have somebody come into your home with your significant other and say, I demand world peace. We will come up with this, and we will sign this treaty, and you will forever be peaceful. That isn't how it works. Somebody from the outside can't come in and shake a finger at you and create peace. It's a decision that you make on a moment-to-moment basis, on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis. And to me, that is the beginning of any charitable effort, is knowing that you have capacity to change the world by changing who you are, or by owning who you are, by loving who you are. In fact, science is starting to meet up with that now, and there is a beautiful doctor named, forgot his name now. Anyway, he's this beautiful scientist who just passed away in September, and he has a book called Power versus Force, Dr. David Hawkins. And he has decided that one conscious, loving person can balance out 750,000 people who are not. He says that is the power of love. And he's the scientist who has worked with Linus Pauling, co-authored books with Linus Pauling. He had the largest psychiatric practice in Manhattan back in the 1960s. He's somebody who has great mental power. And he says, just being kind is what is needed in this world. Kind to yourself, loving to yourself, so we can shift the world. And so that is my goal with Peace Begins With Me, a small, big peace project. And I have with me, a stack of cards. If you'd like some of them, I'd be happy to give them to you. It basically says, you are a hero. It might have been your smile. It might have been a real connected conversation. It might have been as simple as you really seeing me, or you really being you. That's a hero in my book, in a world that can feel disconnected. We're asking people to just honor the connections and to offer the connections. And if the least you can do is to sit in your home and offer a kind thought to someone, then that's the least you can do. But we're asking people to do the smallest of things to make the biggest of shifts. And that's part of the reason that I ended up writing a second book called Peace In, Peace Out. It's just the small ways that you can honor who you are and then honor other people. There's one in here that I can never find it when I'm looking for it, but what do you say when you pass a mirror? I invite you to notice the next time you pass a mirror, or look in one of those magnifying mirrors in the hotel. What goes through your head? What are the stories that you're telling yourself? And then tell a different story. Just as an example, in this book, it's on this side of the page, it's just small ways you can honor yourself. This side of the page, small ways you can honor other people. And this one is peace in, forgive yourself. Expect that you will do well today, but don't beat yourself up if the day falls a little short of rock star status. The best lessons sometimes arrive in prickly-looking packages. Look for the lesson and spend less time on the pain. When you accept the lesson, that particular package may stop arriving at your door. And the peace out is forgive someone their differences. I was an ace speller in junior high school, and I used that as a reason to convict people in my mind of some felony spelling offense. Weird, I know, but sometimes when we know what's right, we use it as a reason to make someone else wrong. If you've memorized every rule about etiquette, that's great. We can still forgive the person who hasn't. So it's a series of messages like that. And I do want to read this. It's from the tomb of an Anglican bishop at Westminster Abbey, and it just sums it all up. He said, "When I was young and free and my imagination had no limits, I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change. So I shortened my sights and decided to change only my country, but it too seemed immovable. As I grew into my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now I realize as I lie on my deathbed, if only I had changed myself first, then by example I might have changed my family. From their inspiration and encouragement, I would then have been able to better my country, and who knows, I might have even changed the world." And that's what we have the opportunity to do every day. And you guys, oh my gosh, you have the opportunity to be heroes every day. You touch virtually everybody in the country through what you do. So we have the opportunity to walk into those circumstances with beautiful, loving, accepting energy and recreate the fabric of our world that's somehow been shredded. Or you have the opportunity to just let it be. But please, at first do no harm. I love that. But I think we all have the opportunity to do more than that, just by being kind to yourself and to others. So I would remind you to remember who you are, because you are brilliant. Even Albert Einstein says you're a genius. You're brilliant, you're magnificent, you're a puzzle piece that the world needs right now. It looks like a crazy, crazy world, but there is a solution built into it, and we're all a part of it. So remember that, and then be who you are. And that's hard in this world sometimes, when the world is saying, be a little less of that because it makes me uncomfortable. Don't tell me the truth, tell me what I want to know. But have the courage to be who you are. And then when you know who you are, it's really automatic to share who you are. So I invite you to share who you are, even if it's walking into a Target store with a smile on your face, or seeing a crying infant on the flight home and offering kind thoughts to the mother, or a smile. I mean, share who you are. It's so easy to walk through life in a bubble. And when you do that, when you share who you are, we absolutely can change the world. So I thank you so much for letting me come here today. I hope to talk to some of you later if you'd like. I do have some of my books with me, but I don't want you to feel any pressure on that. And I do have a lot of the hero cards, and I'd love if anybody would want to go home with a pocket full of hero cards so they can reward the kindness in their own life. But thank you so much for letting me be here today.